Welcome to today's explainer. Okay, picture this. Imagine a scenario where a tiny, almost completely invisible human error nearly derailed an entire political party's election campaign. It sounds crazy, right? But today, we're looking at a genuinely fascinating, high-stakes legal battle from South Africa. It's essentially the ultimate showdown between the lofty, beautiful ideals of democracy and the cold, hard, absolutely unbending realities of logistics.
Okay, let's dive into this. Can a simple clerical error completely disqualify a political party from running in a major city's election? That's the central dilemma here. We are looking at what happens when strict, unforgiving procedural rules collide head-on with a fundamental, constitutional right to vote. So who wins? Is it the rulebook or is it the spirit of the law?
To really understand the pressure cooker this case was in, you've got to consider the timeline. 6 days, that's it. The Constitutional Court of South Africa had to hear this case, deliberate, and make a final binding ruling just 6 days before millions of South Africans were actually scheduled to head out and vote. Talk about a ticking clock. The justices actually noted in their decision that their judgment had to be prepared in absolute haste because the stakes were just so incredibly immediate.
A race against time, the ticking clock of the 2006 elections.
So let's look at how this played out. In early 2006, the Electoral Commission was scrambling. They're trying to organize elections across 283 municipalities, all at the exact same time. On January 17th, the African Christian Democratic Party, or the ACDP, makes a bulk payment for their election deposits. Then, just 2 days later, January 19th, is the absolute drop-dead deadline to submit all candidate lists and deposits. But it's not until January 24th that the party realizes a massive error was made. And that leaves this incredibly shrinking window to resolve the dispute before the final judgment on February 24th, literally days before the March 1st election. The pressure was absolutely immense.
The cost of a mistake. How a missing name caused a crisis.
283,000 rand. To make things a bit easier for these 2006 elections, the Electoral Commission introduced this new, centralized bulk payment system. So, instead of going around paying at hundreds of different local offices, the ACDP made one massive bulk payment of 283,000 rand by bank-guaranteed check, straight to the Central Electoral Commission in Pretoria. This single payment was meant to cover their deposits for a whole long list of municipalities.
But contrast that massive sum with this tiny little number, 3,000 rand. That was the prescribed deposit required to run in the Cape Town Metropolitan Council, which, by the way, was one of the most important and heavily contested races in the entire country. And Cape Town was the single city the party accidentally left off their payment list. It was just a simple oversight. Actually, scratch that, it's basically a typo, but one with massive, massive consequences.
But here's where things get really interesting. 10,000 rand. Between making that bulk payment on January 17th and the final deadline on the 19th, the party actually decided not to contest some of the other smaller municipalities they'd already paid for. So because they dropped out of those other races, the Electoral Commission was literally sitting on a surplus of 10,000 rand of the party's money when the clock struck the deadline. Now, you'd probably think, great, they've got the money, just apply it to the Cape Town race, problem solved, right? Well, no. The Electoral Commission took a very, very strict stance. To them, unallocated funds simply do not count as a valid deposit. Because the party failed to officially notify the commission to allocate that specific surplus money to Cape Town before the deadline hit, the commission disqualified them from the Cape Town election, period. In their eyes, the rules are the rules. Enfranchisement over red tape, the spirit of the law. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the powerful precedent it brings up. Obviously, the party fought this disqualification, taking it all the way up to the Constitutional Court. The majority opinion, which was authored by Justice Skweyiya, strongly championed the spirit of democracy over strict bureaucracy. The court leaned heavily on this quote from Justice Sachs. "The vote of each and every citizen is a badge of dignity. Legislation dealing with the franchise must be interpreted in favor of enfranchisement rather than disenfranchisement." The majority's whole argument was that universal adult suffrage is a foundational value of the Constitution. Courts should be actively trying to include voters in parties, not trying to exclude them on technicalities. And this brings us to a really brilliant legal comparison: substantive compliance versus strict compliance. The majority reasoned that, hey, the underlying purpose of the law was already fulfilled. Why? Well, because the commission already had the party's candidate list for Cape Town, they already knew the party intended to run, and the commission was physically holding a surplus of the party's money. Narrowly reading the law just to disqualify them when their money was literally sitting right there in the commission's bank account served absolutely no legitimate statutory purpose.
The case for strict rules.
The burden of the machine.
But not all the justices agreed with that take. Justice Skweyiya authored a very passionate dissenting opinion, and he focused on the fragile, massive machinery required to actually pull off a national election. He quoted Justice Yakub from an earlier case, saying, "The mere existence of the right to vote without proper arrangements for its effective exercise does nothing for a democracy. It is both empty and useless." The dissent argued that without rigorous, totally unbending rules, the entire electoral process just collapses under its own weight. In this view, having a strict process is exactly what protects democracy in the first place. 3,050,200. That is the staggering, mind-boggling number of individual ballot papers the Commission had to prepare for the Cape Town Metro alone. Over 3 million pieces of paper. And get this, they cannot even begin the process of printing a single one of them until every single party's registration is absolutely locked in and finalized. When we look at the journey of a ballot, it shows exactly why strict adherence to deadlines is a matter of pure survival for the Commission. First, they have to design and verify drafts with local committees. Second, they print and bind them into books of exactly 100 ballots, just so nothing gets lost during the count. Third, they have to plastic wrap every single book to prevent tampering. And finally, securely distribute them to 758 different presiding officers. This dizzying logistical mountain has to happen in just a matter of weeks. If even one party bends the timeline, it throws this entire massive machine into complete chaos.
So the dissent's final warning was very clear. Unequal rule enforcement compromises the legitimacy and fairness of the election. Basically, bending the timetable for one party, even if it's for a totally honest, innocent mistake, treats the parties unequally. It forces the Commission to take on extra burdens because of one party's failure, and that threatens the integrity of the entire democratic exercise.
So, the crucial point is, we finally arrive at the verdict, the court's high-stakes decision.
So how did the highest court in the land resolve this incredibly tense standoff between the spirit of enfranchisement and the absolute necessity of strict logistical rules? Well, the majority overturned the Electoral Commission's decision. They officially declared that the party did, in fact, meet the deposit requirements through that surplus bulk payment, and they ordered the Commission to allow the party to contest the March 1st election in Cape Town. Ultimately, substantive compliance took the win, reinstating the party with literally days to spare before the voters arrived at the polls. Which leaves us with a pretty profound question to end on. Should the spirit of enfranchisement always override the strict logistical rules that keep democracy running? It is a remarkably delicate balance between accommodating genuine human error and maintaining the rigorous, unbending rule of law that makes our elections possible in the first place. Think about that the next time you cast your ballot. And just consider the massive, invisible machinery working tirelessly behind the scenes. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.